as folks are putting those comments in the chat, we will go ahead and kick off. We are really excited to launch our November, or excuse me, it's October, our October webinar in partnership with Montana Office of Public Instruction. This webinar is on assessing data skills and analyzing assessment results. So we're excited to see some of those comments in the chat and dive into how you can start assessing these data skills. So my name is Lee Ellen Harmer. I am the Partnerships Manager for Data Science for Everyone. Really excited to kick us off here. I am joined by my colleague, Samantha Leave, who is the Director of Policy for Everyone. And then, of course, probably some familiar faces for you all. That's Katrina Engeldrum from the Math Instructional Coordinator with Montana OPI, and Amy Consen, our Professional Learning Manager at Montana OPI. If you haven't joined us on one of these other webinars, this is our two organizations are putting on this series in partnership with one another, and we are thrilled to be here and just learning from you, and hopefully we'll be giving you some nuggets to learn along the way. And with that, I am actually going to turn it over to our guest this afternoon. Amber Zavakar is a K-12 math specialist at Genesee Intermediate School District. She is going to be sharing some wonderful expertise with us today, but I'm going to let her give a quick intro. Amber?
All right. Well, hi everyone. Thank you for being here and thank you for engaging in this work. It is a worthwhile endeavor, and I'm always excited to be able to come on and talk about anything and everything data science. So thank you. Just really quickly, I've been in my role now for about 3 years at the Genesee ISD. If anyone's familiar with Flint, Michigan, that is where our office hails from, and I serve in that county about 42 different school districts across K-12 math. And part of the reason I was able to engage in this work is because I did apply for and we were recipients of a really awesome grant in the state of Michigan that allowed us to kind of pioneer data science. And so you'll see that on your screen. That's what that references to. And we did pilot the U Cubed program. So a lot of what I'm going to talk about today is kind of that experience and how we used specifically assessment in that program. So thank you. Welcome.
Thank you, Amber. We're so excited to have you with us today. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Samantha to kick us off.
Perfect. Like I said, I was so pleasantly surprised of the kind of comments in there. I was really preparing for some negative things. I also saw comments about just childhood memories of assessments and being bad. And so that's kind of where I thought maybe as adults, we might have some negative feelings too. So really just to ground us, let's take a moment and talk about what we mean by assessment, right? If I were to pull out a dictionary definition, it would say something like assessments is evaluation or estimation of the nature, quality, or ability of someone or something. When we hear that, our focus almost always lands on the someone, the student. It kind of feels a little judgmental, maybe a label, a score, and we can kind of fix that. It can feel a little fixed. So what we're going to do is we're going to kind of change our focus a little bit. And what we're really going to zoom into in that particular definition, instead of the someone, is going to be the something. And if we really think of assessments and something, that kind of shifts our mind and becomes a little bit more of a game changer. Because what is the something, right? When we're doing assessments, what is it? The something is our teaching. Is this lesson working? Did that explanation land? The something is the curriculum. Are those resources actually building understanding? Are they efficient? The something is also something, learning process itself. What is the student getting stuck? Are these strategies working? Should I shift to a different strategy? If we're looking at it this way, assessments no longer feel like a judgment of students. It becomes feedback for everyone in the ecosystem of learning, and it's the information we need in order to grow. It's the answer to the most important question we ask ourselves every single day. Are my students learning? And how do I know if they're learning? So with that being said, next slide. we're going to look at two different focuses and the two different types of ways that we're using assessments in the classroom. So the first one is checking on our students' progress. This is like a quick status update to see if the kids already get and what they're still struggling with. So we know exactly who needs help, this can kind of be informal assessments, such as thumbs up, thumbs down, exit tickets. We can also do formal assessments like unit tests and projects. The other thing is also for our teachers, right? It's improving our teaching. This is when teachers look at the class grades or quiz results as a group to ask, how did my lesson go? Did most kids miss the same question? Maybe I need to re-explain that topic, and use alternate methods. And so those are kind of the two focuses that we're going to concentrate on today. And so first, we're going to focus kind of on that student learning experience. So Amber, if you want to go ahead and take it away with the next slide.
Awesome. Thanks, Sam. Yeah, so I'm going to talk just a little bit about how we assessed in the classroom. So again, we utilized the U-Cubed data science curriculum in our setting for our grant. And just to kind of bring a little bit of clarity, I know, actually, I don't know a ton about the Montana landscape other than Big Sky. That's literally all I know. And so, what I can tell you is a little bit about our context. And so our program was implemented in 6 different districts across 3 different counties. And we ranged from very diverse, we had very rural districts. So we really had a lot of diversity in the districts that we were serving in this program. And I think that's really important when it comes to thinking about assessing and measuring student learning. And we'll talk about that as we go along. So one of the things that I think really makes assessment in the data science classroom a little bit different is the way that we think about how do students demonstrate their learning versus a traditional setting where maybe it's a paper pencil test or a multiple choice, something like that, right? So for us in the U Cubed program, U Cubed is a project-based approach, right? So all of the units of learning culminated in a project that students had to produce, right? And so they spent the entire unit instead of taking quizzes or, what we think of as exit tickets with like the 1 or 2 multiple choice. They actually spent their entire unit building toward this one end goal with checks along the way that very clearly led them to improvement toward that end goal. Right. And that was a big shift for our teachers. And I can't say that enough. Our teachers really at first were like, what do you mean we don't give multiple choice exams? What do you mean we don't, so breaking out of some of these traditional mindsets was a challenge at first, and it felt a little uncomfortable, but we know that learning is messy and it's messy for our kids the same way that it's messy for our teachers, and that's okay. And we really tried to live into that. So first and foremost, everything was project based, as I mentioned, and we really believed in utilizing rubrics. So instead of giving students an A or an 85%, students in our program had very specific things that they were working toward and that they were hoping to demonstrate. And they actually, as part of our rubric process, we had them evaluate one another's work first. So they would do some peer review, they would do some self-review using the same rubric. And then the final step was to have the teacher kind of review and provide some feedback on that rubric. And one of the things that we loved about the rubric is that it does give that immediate feedback, right? So instead of something like an 85%, where you might say, well, what does that mean? What do I need to do better? I got number 4 wrong, but why did I get it wrong? Right? Yeah. So what we believed in was that there needed to be multiple layers to that, right? Students can give each other feedback, they reflect themselves, and then they hear from their teacher, and then the rubric tells them exactly what they could have done. So if they were, scoring in level, I don't know, a level 4, if you will, and wanted to get to a level 5, right? There was a very defined difference between those 2 levels, so students knew exactly what they needed to do to sort of improve their work. The other thing that made our work quite a bit different is that we really leaned into this idea that mathematics cannot and should not be separate from children's lives, right? And I say children, and I don't mean that in a demeaning way. There are children. These are the young people who are going out into the world and are going to make a difference, when all of us are wherever we are in 30 years, right? And so we felt that it was really necessary. I was going to say nursing home, but I wasn't going to like, where hopefully I'm not in a nursing home in 30 years. Maybe I will be. Who knows? Um, so, so we felt that it was really important to marry those things, right? We did not believe that mathematics should be separated. And so the UQ program did a really great job of inviting students to demonstrate their understanding of mathematics through these social issues, these social, discussions that mattered to them, right? So they had conversations about water in their communities. They had conversations about their favorite songs. They had conversations about when they look at cities, what are the priorities that they want to focus on, right? And so they were assessed on their mathematical and data science skills, but they were able to do it in a way that they were talking about the things that mattered to them. So again, from a teacher lens, that means that each student's work looked a little different, right? They all followed the same rubric, but from a teacher lens, one project might look very different from, one to the other. And I want to make sure I address this question here. So did the students pick these contexts themselves or were they provided by the educators? That's a great question, Katrina. So they were given sort of a guardrail, if you will, and they chose their topic within that guardrail. So I can tell you just very candidly, we had a young woman in one of the classes who, when she was looking at her cities, she wanted to investigate cases of crime, and specifically, she wanted to look at cases of rape. And when I asked her about why this was important to her, she said, "Well, it impacts my family, and it's something I care a lot about. And as a young woman, I think it's something I need to care about, right?" So absolutely, we gave them guardrails, but then within those guardrails, they were able to make a lot of individual choice about what their projects look like and what they chose to study and how they chose to demonstrate their understanding of the data science concepts. Our program also really emphasized student voice and choice, as I just mentioned, in so many ways. And obviously, our program is really technology focused. So they used everything from CodeApp to Colab. They used Desmos. They used Excel spreadsheets. I mean, they used a variety of technology tools because we believed that part of assessing the mathematics is the ability to use these tools that help us improve the efficiency of how we engage in mathematics. So technology was a really important focus for us, but these were all really big shifts for our teachers. I mean, if you're sitting there right now and you've had any of these experiences, I'm like in my setting, I might be a little surprised. Our teachers were some of the first who had experiences like this in the classroom. This is not how they were taught. This is how not how many of them were ever trained. So there were some really big shifts, and I can say that I think I'm more proud of the shift that our teachers made. We knew that data science was going to be a shift for kids, but I'm really proud of the way that our teachers really re-envisioned what teaching and learning and assessing in a mathematics classroom looks like as a result of some of these shifts. So thanks, Leland. If you could switch to the next slide, please. So leaning into assessments then, as I think I already mentioned, we were a building thinking classrooms kind of model. We found that discussion and small group work, all of these things were really important to elevating and helping students learn and share their ideas. We really leaned into collective efficacy for students in this work. We really believed that, especially as our teachers were learning, our kids were also learning, and we just learned better together, right? So in a project-based classroom, utilizing building thinking classrooms, some of the things that you would see from an assessment standpoint were things like journal entries, right? So in their journal entries, students would talk about everything from how did your data collection go? What's your process? What are you planning to do to collect your data? Once you collected your data, what were some hiccups that you ran into, right? Like we heard a lot from students in their journal entries about how their plan to collect their data, once they started to implement, they realized, wow, it's actually a lot harder to quantify the thing that I'm looking for. It's a lot more difficult to measure. And so we saw a lot of revisioning and editing of thinking in those journal entries as students went through the process. We also leaned pretty heavily into vocabulary because we recognize that data science and even when we ask students to talk about things that they care about or that matter to them, sometimes we need to help them with the vocabulary to describe those things or to talk about those things, right? So we leaned very heavily into daily vocabulary where we would get together in small groups and we would put a data science term or some other term that we'd been investigating up on the board, and we would say, collectively, how would we define this? Right. And we would get our definition and we'd go out to the internet and we'd get a couple different sources from the internet. And then we would come together as a group to have a common understanding of what this term meant as it related to our work in our classroom. Right. So we did a lot of front loading and really building up their vocabulary because one of the things we wanted to make sure students could do was talk about what they were learning, to talk about their process, to reflect on whether it's the data science inquiry cycle, whether it's planning for their data collection. We wanted to make sure that they had the language for that. And I'm going to pause just again to make sure that I don't miss a question. Okay, and there's no question. So thank you for your comments. So we also use vertical non-permanent surfaces. So for those of you who are familiar with building thinking classrooms, one of the things that was really powerful for our kids and specifically for our teachers as it came to assessing student understanding was making it visible. So having student work up on the board, having students working at vertical spaces in small groups, and we tried really hard to make it so that each student's work was identifiable using different color markers. It's a nifty little trick, but if you give each kid a different color, you have an easier time identifying whose thoughts are whose, right? So that way, if there is a student misconception or if there is some thinking that needs sort of refinement or revision or fine tuning, I know it's such a small thing, right? And yet it makes a world of difference. This is why each one of my teachers got one of those like 50 packs of markers and there's 12 different colors in there. Anyway, we got really creative with our marker colors, I must say. But in any case, so really visualizing student thinking so that teachers could be responsive. Sometimes that was to help students dig deeper. We recognize that sometimes children were kind of thinking here, right? Our students were thinking here, and we wanted them to dig deeper into a topic. And we could tell that by looking at their thinking on the board, right? As they were sort of doing their work and making their plans. We also felt that it was really important at those vertical non-permanent surfaces to work collaboratively. One of the things that we've tried really hard to do is to reduce, as Samantha said, reduce that anxiety around math, but specifically around assessment. And sometimes things like exit tickets, like that you still hand in to your teacher at the end of a lesson, the feedback that we got from kids was that that was still a really anxiety triggering event for them. And so being able to work in small groups where their work was still very visible and the teacher could provide that feedback and sort of keep track of student understanding, but not in a way that felt judgmental, was a huge shift for our kids and for our teachers. We also utilized real-time feedback. So our students, the project that they were working on, they would get a series of Google Slides on the very first day of the unit. And those Google Slides would provide them an outline of all the steps that they needed to take to get toward that end project that they were creating. And the nice thing about doing it in Google Docs is that it allowed students to work at their own pace, but it also allowed them to get feedback. So our teachers would say like, all right, everyone, on Thursday, I'm going to review slides 10 through 13. So make sure you've got all your ideas captured because I'm going to be leaving you some feedback. And teachers could go right into that shared Google Doc or those Google Slides, and they could make edits, they could add comments, they could, insert hyperlinks of things that they wanted students to maybe include. So we really found that real-time feedback was much more powerful than, say, a response that came the next day or after a weekend or something like that. And then we also made time for data talks and discussion. So at the beginning of almost every single class, our students engaged in a data talk. And this was a way for the teacher to really get a sense of how they were doing with thinking about data in a cycle, thinking about data through an ethical lens. There were all sorts of indicators that as students had their conversation and they engaged in those data talks, the teacher was always looking for those indicators of, are we making the steps toward thinking like a data scientist that we want our students to be able to make? And so having those data talks and that open discussion not only helped our kids grow, but it helped give our teachers a really strong sense of where our students were at. So, Leon, if you don't mind. So I wanted to just kind of give you a sense of what our classrooms looked like. So this is one of our 8 data science classrooms. And I do want to highlight, and I think it's really important. I know, Samantha, you didn't ask me to share this, but I'm going to share it anyway because I'm just so proud of my teachers and our kids. Our grant was designed to target students who were low performing, who had historically struggled in math. And so every single one of the students in our project had been unsuccessful in a math class prior to coming to data science, and every single one of them was not on track to graduate. Many of the students here, one of the teachers said to me, she's like, "Oh my gosh, I taught these kids freshman year back in Algebra 1, and every single one of them had their head down. And look at them now." Right? I mean, that image just says so much about kids working together. And they've got one of the additions that this particular district made was that they put an iPad next to every single one of the vertical non-permanent surfaces so that there was no break between when students were thinking about something and when they could reach for a resource. So that was a really powerful shift that this district, they had a grant that they were able to get those devices and make that work for them. Not every district had that, but certainly this was a really cool extension that just made it a seamless transition between thinking about our data science process and planning for our data science process, and then actually searching for the data and getting those tools that we need. So, Leon, if you don't mind. And then I just got some samples of student work for you. So obviously throughout the process, we never just waited until the end to assess student learning, right? We were constantly assessing student learning. And I gotta be clear that that was also a shift, right? Many of our teachers felt like because they weren't collecting things that they weren't assessing. And that was a mindset shift that we really had to lean into in the first few weeks of this work, right? So the students, for example, in Unit 1, they built these Dear Data postcards, right? This was the culmination of their project, right? That they did at the end of Unit 1. And they collected data about something in their life that they could track for sometimes it was a week, sometimes it was 10 days, 2 weeks. And so then they created data visualizations about their work, right? And what they discovered and what trends or patterns they noticed, what additional research questions they might want to ask. And so our teachers had the opportunity to, again, follow along this process throughout the whole unit and help students revise their thinking. So one of the students, again, going back to things that are easy to capture, he had a plan, what he wanted to do, and then he realized about partway through that it was actually really difficult to capture his data in a quantitative way. And this particular project was leaning into quantitative data. So he had to make some revision. He had to kind of re-manipulate his data collection plan. But that was a really powerful moment for that student because he now had a really clear understanding of what qualitative and what quantitative is, right? And he was able to make that connection and revise his thinking and still come up with a really cool project. You can go ahead to the next slide. So going into rubrics then a little bit, because I don't know how familiar the Montana team is with using rubrics. I know I had previously used rubrics on like an exam situation where again, it's still, measuring the written question at the end, if you will, right? Everything that we did, though, was graded on a rubric. We felt it was absolutely necessary that students understand how they're being evaluated. And so all of this information was available from day one when the project started. So they knew exactly what was being expected of them. They knew exactly what the different sort of levels of proficiency looked like. And they knew, more importantly, how to get to that next level. It was very clear to them, right? It was never just get it right or get it wrong. It was, well, you could be a little bit more clear in your thinking, or maybe your evidence isn't very strong. So we need to bring in more evidence to support the claim that you're trying to make, right? And it made it a lot more clear for our teachers too, because one of the things we learned is that an 85% to one teacher looks very different than an 85% to another teacher when we're just evaluating like students' written work. So having a rubric allowed us to make sure that we're limiting biases, we're making sure that everyone has equitable access to be able to show their thinking and receive feedback. And frankly, it took a little bit of a load off of our teachers, and they felt like they could give better feedback when they used rubrics instead of a traditional grading system. And again, ours involved both the student reflection of themselves, peer reflection by a classmate, and then obviously by the teacher as well. And these were all based on evidence. So students couldn't just say, oh yeah, I did a really good job of, incorporating ethics into my project. They had to actually point to the slide, to the passage, to the source of where they did that. They had to prove and provide evidence that they actually did that thing, which was another really powerful shift that we don't normally see in traditional assessments. Yeah, and of course, at every single unit, we had ethical considerations at all levels because, again, we don't believe in separating mathematics from the human element. We felt that it was really important that those two things are very happily married. And so, at every single opportunity, our students were talking about the ethical considerations of the data collection, the data that they were looking at, how they could go about getting that data. So they really dug deeply into ethical considerations of accessing data. So I see we have a question in here I want to address. So when you assess without collecting, do you document anything or just taking mental notes and giving immediate feedback? So, Carrie, I think I understand your question. So tell me if I'm not answering this correctly. So it sounds like you want to know those in-between stages, right? Not the final project, but those in-between stages. How are we sort of taking note of that? And I actually appreciate that question if I'm capturing it right, because we have to report in our grade books, right? We can't just at the end of the semester be like, oh, by the way, your kid got a C minus, right? So I appreciate that. So our teachers kind of went about this differently. Some of them really leaned into the checklist that Peter Liljedahl talks about in the Building Thinking Classrooms, where they would have specific look fors and they would evaluate students on those look fors. And after certain durations of time, as students grow and have multiple opportunities, then they would translate that into a letter grade, right? So if students, at the end of a week, they were performing at a 3 out of 4, they would give them a corresponding grade in the grade book, right? Some of our districts used standards-based, some of our districts used non-standards-based, more traditional grading. So it was kind of a district by district way of doing it. But for the most part, they received some sort of score for their journal entries, their vocabulary. They received, our students actually got grades for how they engaged in the standards for math practice. So when they were demonstrating that they could persevere in problem solving, when they demonstrated that they could think critically about the work of another, they received points, if you will, for that. Again, how it looked at the different districts looked a little different because their grading systems were different. But we had a variety of different checkpoints throughout to kind of help the student and their families understand that they were making progress toward their ultimate goal. So great question. I hope I captured what you were asking. All right, Leon, if you want to go to the next slide, I think. Yeah, so then the last couple of things is just our student work. What does it look like? So typically students did work in either Google Slides, Google Docs, like I mentioned. They made some spreadsheets and turned their work in on spreadsheets, but oftentimes that was accompanied by some sort of written summary of their work, which again could have been in Google Docs. In some cases, they made posters or diagrams. In one case, they wrote letters to their senator, which was really cool. And then they also built word walls that helped them sort of define their project throughout the unit. And all students contributed to the same word wall. So there were a variety of different ways that we looked at and evaluated student work. So you can go ahead and click. And so this is just a couple of samples that I wanted to share with you all just to show kind of what our students did. So this student tracked how much music they listened to and what they were doing during that time and what their mood was. And again, I think the power here is that A, we're getting students to think about data in a visual way. And B, students are thinking about their emotions. They're thinking about their schedules, the things that they do, the things that they're interested in. We're mirroring mathematics and data science with the human element, which is really important. And if you want to go to the last one there. This is, yep. So this is one of the students made a graph and sort of talked about the water in their communities, household water usage and what it might mean about certain communities, certain families, certain household sizes. And then they talked about the water quality in their area and how that might impact water usage. So again, really powerful social action embedded with mathematics. So this kind of gives you a sense of how we tackled assessment in our setting. I hope your takeaway, you heard something today that you're like, oh, I can try that, right? Maybe not everything, but maybe one thing. Yeah, so that's what I've got.
Amber, did you want to share the resources for the engineering tomorrow?
Sure. Yeah. And actually, you know what? I'm so sorry. I forgot. I threw Tom Brady slides in here. I was sitting here thinking these were somebody else. No, this is fine. Yeah, so the engineering tomorrow, I can actually put it in the chat if that's helpful. Because one of the things that we sort of tackled here in Michigan, and again, I'm not, I don't know, is Montana a Common Core state? Are you guys a Common Core state? No, they're not. Okay. So we're a Common Core state, and the program that we chose does not cover all of the, I'll say, like traditional algebra 2. And actually, while I do this, Leon, do you want to click to the next slide just to show them? This student did a project on Tom Brady, and it was absolutely fantastic. You can click one more time. Because all this information is available. How cool is this? Whether he's under pressure or not under pressure, his completion rate. Now, this is why this man is the GOAT. Okay. This is why. I don't even like the Patriots, but anyway, this is a really cool project that this young man did that I wanted to just share. And I apologize. I totally forgot I put it in there. So sharing, going back to the engineering tomorrow, resources. So in our state, there were some standards that we're required to cover in Michigan that the UCubed program did not cover. But we wanted to really honor the data science experience and the inquiry cycle for students. So Engineering Tomorrow is a nonprofit organization that we actually kind of just discovered. I don't even remember how. And they actually create all of these labs and they will send you the materials so that you can do them with your students. And they've got a variety of secondary standards. They'll send you stuff from middle school and high school. They don't have anything elementary, but they do have 612. And they just send you free kits of stuff for a whole classroom of 30 kids. And the really exciting part is that you get to actually connect with an engineer from their team to talk about what students learned throughout the lab experience and kind of go through that reflective process. So they're really exciting. They're no cost. Like I said, they're a nonprofit organization that is just committed to supporting students in mathematics and data science. And so we were really excited to use some of those lab experiences to fill in the gaps in our state with some of the standards that we needed to cover. So thank you, Sam, for reminding me of that really awesome resource. I encourage everyone to check those out. So thanks. And Leon, I don't think I missed any more slides. Holy canary.
I think there's just a couple more that were part of that project. So I'll just kind of click through them real quickly and then we can jump on
Awesome.
to the next thing. Yeah.
Yeah, his analysis of Tom Brady. It's pretty exciting. Maybe a little more timely when he was still like playing professionally because he's obviously retired now. But if you have any football fans out there, this is a way to again hook your kids in and get them excited about learning math and data science. So thank you.
I think that's so interesting that students kind of take ownership of their topics because they don't always get that opportunity in mathematics. And so Mahmoud, I know, had mentioned that there was a student that did a project on crocodiles. And then here with Tom Brady, like you are, as a student really kind of get to take ownership of what you're learning and incorporating all of that learning is just phenomenal. When you're excited about the topic, you're more likely to share with your peers of, oh, this is what I'm doing, and this is how it's related to, the mathematical concept. That's just so fun. Sorry for my small little tangent. So thank you, Amber, for all of those student examples and all of the information about project-based learning. For some of you guys that are in here, because we know we also have some elementary teachers, let's kind of shift over to our youngest learners. So if you're teaching lower elementary, you might look at this particular pie chart and be thinking, this is too complex for my students. And while it's true that the percentages and abstract concept of a whole circle are developmentally advanced, the visual itself can actually still be a powerful starting point. So the tool we're going to talk about is one that you can use tomorrow, and Amber briefly had kind of mentioned it, and it's called the Data Talk. Data Talks are short 5 to 10 minute classroom discussions to help students develop data literacy. This pedagogical strategy is similar in structure to a number talk, but instead of numbers, students are shown a data visual and asked what interests them. In a data talk, the teacher does not have to be an expert in the topic of data visualizations. If a student asks a question, you can say that you don't know the answer, but you'd love to explore and find out together, right? This is a really nice opportunity to model not knowing and embracing uncertainty. Data talks are intended to pique students' curiosity and encourage question asking and to help them understand and read the data-filled world in which we all live in. Now, the pie chart on the screen, and now looking at this particular pie chart, I can imagine some of you are thinking a pie chart for first graders. It's kind of a fair question, right? What about a simple bar graph instead or a picture graph, right? Those are maybe a little bit more intuitive. Those are maybe more grade appropriate. But we can definitely use this particular pie chart in a data talk, focusing on the visual story and maybe not so much on the numbers. So remember, our goal is to assess foundational skills, observational comparison questioning. So imagine you show this exact pie chart to your class, but you cover the percentages. Your prompt is maybe still the same, right? What do you notice? What do you wonder? What do you see? What are your questions? So let's listen to what they say and respond. And the responses are kind of the assessment, right? So if a student says, "I see a circle with colors," or there's a part with a snowman, you're assessing basic observations. If a student says the yellow part is bigger than the white part, you now know they can compare two data points visually. That's kind of a huge win. They're reading the graph. If a student says it looks like summer piece is the biggest, that's a major milestone. They are making an inference about most based on visual size. Here's the powerful teaching and assessment move you can make next. After the discussion, you can say, let's see if we can turn the pie chart into a different kind of picture to help us better understand. You can then, as a class, translate the pie chart into a simple bar graph or a picture graph right on the whiteboard. This is where you assess the build and building the connection between abstract and concrete representations. So if this big yellow part is for summer and it's the most popular, what would that look like in a bar, right? Would that be a tall bar? Would that be a short bar? And then you can draw that. And if winter is the smallest piece, what is that bar going to look like in comparison? This translation process is where the deepest assessment happens. You can see which students are making the connections between the sizes of the pie slice and the height of the bar. And you are assessing their understanding that different graphs can tell very similar or same stories. Next slide. As we get shifted to, as we start, get, sorry, as we get started to shift gears, analyzing assessment results to improve instruction, I'd love to get a quick sense of where you're all coming from. So Matangi, if you could just put up the survey question or poll, what is your comfort level in using classroom or assessment data in order to improve your instruction? So we've got three options here. If you could just take a minute and fill that out. Great. I love that you guys are comfortable and confident in utilizing assessments in this manner because I will fully admit that in my time as a classroom teacher, there were some times that I'm like, hey, I'm utilizing this assessment, but the assessment is not like, how do I actually use the results to improve my instruction? Or the biggest time that I had that issue was actually when we were getting state assessment back. We would get those reports and I didn't fully understand what those reports would mean or how I was supposed to utilize them as a teacher. So I love that for a majority of those in here that you guys are very comfortable and that you guys are confident in that. So let's go ahead and move on to the next slide. Perfect. So let's talk about the most important part of this whole process, the mindset shift. This is the secret sauce. We've all been there. You grade a quiz and the scores are maybe lower than you hoped. The initial totally human reaction is often frustrating. You might think, oh, they just didn't study or they weren't paying attention or they weren't listening. That's kind of the old way of thinking. It's like if you were a chef and a customer sends a dish back and you just think, well, they must have no taste buds or, they like things that are just not on the plate or they don't like the things that are on the plate. And so you kind of put the problem entirely on them. But if we flip the script again, thinking of the something, the new way is to see those low scores and not as a student problem, but as the most honest teaching feedback we can get as educators. It's about taking the same stack of quizzes and asking a kinder question, more curious question. Maybe did my lesson stick for everyone? How could I explain this concept differently tomorrow? Asking those kind of curious questions. It's the difference between that chef who blames the customer and the chef who tastes the soup and says, you know what, this actually needs some salt, or you know what, this ingredient maybe wasn't the best choice. And that brings us to the goal. The goal is to move from a culture of judging where it can feel pretty stuck to a culture of adjusting, which is all about action and growth. It's not about blame, it's about finding a better path forward for everyone. Next slide. And so there are several different models or cycles that educators can use, and maybe you guys have seen or been presented on a few of them. So this kind of like circular pyramid type structure might look familiar. It's the MTSS model, but I want to draw your attention to the cycle that makes it work. This isn't just a school-wide process. It's a perfect description of what effective classroom teachers do all the time. In fact, the cycle uses the exact same steps we just talked about on the previous slides. So let's kind of connect the different dots, right? So identifying, this is the moment we notice a pattern. It's seeing the stack of quizzes and realizing, wait, most of the class missed a question number 5. So we've kind of identified instructional snag. Analyzing, this is where we ask the powerful question, why did they miss that question? We're going to dig a little bit deeper. Was it a vocabulary issue? Was it a misconception? Did my lesson only appeal to one type of learner? And then we're going to plan on how we're going to move forward or improve. So what can you try next? This is where we get really creative. We plan a new strategy, maybe using a visual for the next day or a hands-on activity for a small group, and then implementing that. This is where we take that plan and do it. We reteach and we see if that actually works, which brings us back to evaluate. We're going to check if that worked. We give it a quick follow-up question or observation, and see did more of your students understand this time than they did originally. The cycle is the engine of MTSS, and it's also the engine of a responsive data-informed classroom. So every time you go through these steps with your classroom data, you are strengthening your tier 1 instruction. You're not just teaching, but you're also problem solving. Because of time, we are going to skip the next slide. And I do want to give Katrina and Amy the opportunity to kind of talk about how you guys can maybe actually use some of your state assessment data. Katrina?
Thanks, Sam. So Sam mentioned earlier about the getting that state data back and not really knowing what to do with it all the time. And so we wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about those misconception reports that you're going to get. The mass testing window just opened up, I believe, yesterday. So you're going to get these reports pretty soon, toward the mid of December, I would anticipate. But some of the things that you'll see on there are like the misconception and common error section. So you'll get those on a student report. You can have those on classroom reports, school reports, and district reports as well. And we wanted to take a moment to just describe to you what that means, that language of misconceptions and common errors. And what it really is just a persistent misunderstanding that's happening for your students. There's kind of two layers of that. Sometimes it's just an error, meaning that it can correct itself over time with some practice. So it's just something that students make commonly. A misconception is where they really have a core understanding that is just misaligned. Next slide, please. Thanks, Amy, for putting that link in there. So these are some ways that misconceptions can occur. These come from the Journal of Learning Sciences and the Mathematics Educator Journal. And they're basically stating, these two resources, that misconceptions happen primarily when students are taking prior knowledge and then it's not lining up with new concepts. So a good example of this you'll see, I think that most people could probably relate to, is fractions. Students know that if they add numbers, that they should be able to get a sum, right? And when they go to apply that thinking to a fraction, we see a lot of students with fractions with different denominators just add across the top and add across the bottom, and they expect that to work. So that's them using prior knowledge, expecting the rules to be the same. And in the case of fractions where the denominator is the same, that is the case. But when we have different denominators, it's not. So we have a misconception occurring. We have students in that case maybe making an overgeneralization. So they're saying, oh, this works all the time, so it's going to work in this case too. They might be noticing some surface level patterns, but they're not thinking about, in the case of fractions, again, the fact that 1/4 has different size portions than, say, 1/5. And so those don't always translate to equivalent sections of a circle or rectangle. We also might see students try to apply familiar ideas in ways that seem logical. So they're forming a conjecture, but they don't really understand the follow through of that conjecture and proving it and then verifying that that process is going to work. Next slide, please. Thank you. So when we have those misconceptions, we get that report and we see student A is struggling with this concept. They have this misconception happen. Here are some things that we can do, again, from that Mathematics Educator Journal resource. We can use that data to try to diagnose. And I think that that is an important part because we want to learn whether that's an error that's happening, something that just was a quick mistake, a student misread the question, they reacted incorrectly to it, or a true misconception happening in a breakdown in thinking. We might also start to apply some interventions. We might use that MTSS framework that Sam mentioned on the last couple slides. Start to think about trying to build connections to things students already are excelling at. So taking something that they have a context awareness of, say maybe cooking, if we're sticking on this fractions analogy that we're using, and they really like to cook, we might start to talk about the different measuring cups and how those have different amounts within the measuring cups. We might start to use some peer tutoring or some collaborative activities. We might bring in some representations. We might take those mistakes that are happening a lot and use them in an error analysis activity, for instance, to have students dig into why this isn't correct. And we might use clear and concise mathematical language to break down misunderstandings, going back to that vocabulary component that Amber brought up way in the beginning. Next slide, please. And this is just what your report is going to look like when you get it. This is an example of a classroom report. So you might see your number of students here listed on the far right side. They'll say how many students in the classroom had which misconceptions. And this is going to help you read this report and this data and then respond to it in the classroom and understand what you might need to reteach or revisit before moving on to further learning. So we're going to spend a little bit of time looking at some of these misconceptions. I know we have some mostly K through 7 teachers in here. So what I'd like to do at the time that we have is pick one of these misconceptions. I kind of pulled these from a couple different places. Pick one that fits your grade band and think about how you would address it in your classroom if it was on a student report. So you're getting a report that says student in your classroom is struggling, for instance, with believing correlation causes causation or implies causation, I mean. What would you do for that student? Ooh, Sam, I like that. Yep, asking them what they think the definition is would be good. That vocabulary process makes me think one of those Freyer models would probably be beneficial, where you have them write down the non-examples and examples, the definition of the word, some characteristics, pictures, things like that. That would be really helpful for that student. Oh yeah, Carrie, I like that too. Drawing connections. What are the differences? Great. What would we do if this was a whole class? So you're getting the same report students are really struggling. We'll just stick on this example about um, understanding the difference between mean and median. And you get this report, and like 5 kids in the class are really struggling with this out of 12. What do you do for that whole class? I like that application piece. I also saw bringing in manipulatives. So making that thinking more concrete is really great. Maybe trying one of those PBL examples that Amber brought up from the beginning of this. Yeah, lining them up, making it visual and come alive. These are all really great. Thank you for putting them in the chat and engaging in this with us. And I'm going to pass it back over to Sam.
Perfect. So we would love, in the next 4 minutes, we just want to make sure that you guys are aware of our November 11th webinar, and that's going to be called The Art of Data Science. To sign up, you can scan the QR code there. This is going to be on November 11th, our usual date and time. Just super excited to have you guys there. Matangi also dropped the webinar registration in the chat. As a reminder, we also need you to complete the feedback and evaluation, which will be on the next slides. But as those are being shown to you, if you guys have any questions you'd like answers to, I know we're limited on time. If you can go over, that would be great, but also no pressure. Please feel free to drop those questions in the chat, and we will try our best to answer them in our limited time. But as again, reminder to complete the evaluation to get your professional development unit certification.
And Matangi has also put a link in the chat that will take you to all the previous recordings, and these slides will be posted shortly within the next few days, I believe, as well as registration links for the next webinar. So that's for kind of one central location where you can find everything. But in the meantime, please make sure to fill out this form to get your credit.
Perfect. And if you guys have any questions for Amber or just want to kind of pick her brain on some of the things that they've done, she also dropped her contact information in the chat. Otherwise, if you don't have any questions, it was lovely to have you all here, but we'll stick around for a few more minutes just in case anyone's got some questions.